This is the Fearless Experience with Brendan P. Keegan. Conversations with leaders who provide valuable, candid insights from their journeys and share their secrets to what made them successful and fearless.
Okay, today's Fearless Leader crowd is Margaret C. Andrews. She's a leadership expert, an author. She's a founder of the MYLO Center and a Harvard instructor. Her story begins when she was a student at the University of California, Berkeley, and she started as an accountant at Deloitte. So we're gonna jump quite a bit in her career, and her journey's taken her literally around the world. She's spoken on 4 different continents, taught at Harvard and at MIT, and after all that work, she combines the best of business and academia to talk about leadership. So Margaret, welcome to the Fearless Experience today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
When I saw your background and I read your book that I think came out just a week ago or a couple weeks ago,
It
I got
did.
really excited for today. So if I'm a little amped up, I'll have to settle down a little bit. But so you, let me just ask you, you've been teaching at Harvard for a number of years. Like, what's that like? Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, it's awesome. I teach grad students, and actually, they're all adult learners. So I would say the age range is between upper 20s and mid 60s. So it's a lot of diversity in the classroom. And I also teach these executive programs. So, we've got people from middle managers to senior managers, and it's great. It's just a wonderful group.
I can tell you, I actually have taken a couple of Harvard executive education programs. I took one on being a corporate director.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
was really good. So I'm familiar with maybe not your program that I've taken. Maybe I'm going to take that after today, but other Harvard programs. So, well, you founded the MYLO Center, MYLO. So can you tell our audience a little bit of what's behind that and
Yeah.
what made you found that?
Yes. So the class that I teach is called Managing Yourself and Leading Others, which is the acronym for MYLO. So it's the MYLO Center. And the book is called a little different. It's called Manage Yourself to Lead Others, but it still has the MYLO acronym. So that's what's behind it. And the idea behind the class is that when we talk about leadership, we oftentimes think about leading others. And yet some of the most helpful things that we can do in being effective at leadership is to first understand and manage ourselves before, I always say, don't try this at home kind of thing until until you master it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like right now, I've got a book coming out next year, and
Oh,
it's
great.
on I call it the busyness battle, and talks about 6 circles of life. And the first circle, I call it the foundation circle, is self.
Yes.
So I might have to get a hold of my editors and edit the first chapter after today. With some of your words of wisdom. But now, one thing that I did in preparing for today, find out that early in your career, I think we had a similar experience, and that's you had a performance review that had an impact on you.
Yes.
And can you just walk us through what that experience was like? And maybe there's some listeners out there that have only had a couple of performance reviews, or maybe we got some young college grads who are getting their first one right now. So can you tell us about yours and what it was like and how it impacted you?
Yes. So what's interesting, it wasn't even really a performance review, one of these yearly or twice yearly things. It was in a meeting. So I had been working at a place for a while and had lots of promotions and things like that. My boss left and a new one came in, and we just didn't gel, which I'm sure lots of people can kind of understand that. And so one day in his office, I was sitting across the desk from him, and he says, in no uncertain terms, he says, "You're not self-aware." And it was said not in a way of, "Hey, you may not know this. Let me help you with it." It was said in a, "You're so broken, I don't think you could be fixed" kind of way.
Oh,
And so it was pretty shocking for me to hear that, especially the way that it was said. And so I was kind of speechless as he continued on saying that I was overly ambitious, demanding, and, a few other types of choice words. And I really was stunned, right? That throughout my entire career, no one had said anything even remotely like that before. And so it took me a while to calm down and to really understand those words. And as I did, I realized that, the worst part of the story is that he was right. And that I didn't understand how I came across to others. I didn't really understand, both myself and how my behaviors impacted other people. There were some people on my team, not the entire team, but a few that I think were anxious around me and maybe felt unappreciated. And certainly my relationship with my boss was underperforming. And none of this was ever my intention, but it was the result. And guess whose result it was? It was mine. And that was kind of horrifying to me. And so I thought, well, I can't let this stand, right? I can't have this. So I really vowed at that moment that I'm going to fix this. I'm going to figure this out and get better at it. So, being nerd that I am, I dove in and looked everywhere. I looked at people I knew and famous leaders and history and philosophy and psychology and sociology, like anything I could get my hands on. And as I was doing a lot of this, I kept kind of hitting on the same thing. And that is that you have to understand yourself first. And then you can manage yourself. Then you can understand and lead other people. It just, as I say, that old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. The teacher was there again and again and again as I was researching this. And, maybe the eighth time I saw it, I thought, oh, wait a minute. I think I've seen this before. And so I just started, pulling on that thread and applying it to myself and things like that. And it worked, it really did work. It really grounded me in what was important. And it also made me less buffeted by all the winds that happen. When you're grounded, you don't, you're not as impacted by some of the silliness that goes on around you. And so then years later, I created a course and it has gone for, I think, 18 years now, almost 2 decades, which is shocking to me. Of course, I started when I was 4. And then we created a 2-day executive program out of it. I've got a keynote speech. And sort of the next thing felt like, okay, how do you get it out to a wider audience? And then it became a book.
Well, it's interesting listening to that, because you talk about, kind of being a nerd and doing a little research, and I see the license plate over your shoulder, 3.4 in MIT, and I can relate to that. I didn't go to MIT, but I was at RPI, so a similar school. And if you don't mind me sharing, I had a similar experience, and I still remember I was 27 going on 28, and I didn't have a performance review. They did this executive 360 for people that they thought were hypos, and high potential people. Let's go invest in them. And I sat down with this coach, and they were, Brendan, all your scores, the people that you work for love you. You never miss a deadline. You do everything you say you're going to do. And I'm like, I'm 27, 28. And I'm like, hey, that's great. Everybody that works for you will run through a brick wall. You're so good to them. I'm like, oh, this is great. The people that you're peers with, none of them like you. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm a fun guy. What do you mean they don't like me? And they go, no. And it was my self-awareness journey that I got put on. And the person, the first time I ever heard the word emotional intelligence, and at the time, I don't think there were as many books or topics on it as there are today. And I said, but I do such a good job. And at the time I was running sales for a Fortune 100 company. I go, how can the head of marketing not love what I'm doing? We're selling more. She goes, well, she thinks you're like her competitor. And she thinks you would run her over for you to hit your goals. And I go, I don't know if I'd run her over, but I wouldn't slow down. And what was really interesting for me is I thought I was a great teammate. I was a great teammate to my direct team. I was not a good teammate across. And so they got me an executive coach, and what you have to be vulnerable for. And I appreciate your vulnerability and your story. And what the executive coach taught me is, Bernie, when you're running through the office 100 miles an hour, just slow down, talk to people. And this is me, ones that aren't on my team, you mean? And they're like, yes, Brendan, exactly. You have no issues talking to the ones on your team. Go talk to marketing, go talk to strategy, go talk to the practices, go talk to the technical people. And it literally changed so many things about me from then on. And I'm so thankful, Because one thing I say to a lot of young college grads is you've got all the IQ to do whatever you want. And your
Yeah.
IQ is fundamentally going to go up incrementally as you get older. But I go, most likely you don't have the EQ to be the future leader that you want to be. And, if you can work on anything, IQ or EQ over the next, 10, 20 years of your career is absolutely EQ. And I just love the work that you're doing. So, all right, now let's jump into some of your core philosophies. Let's jump into self-awareness. When you say self-awareness, I understand what it means, but we may have some non-self-aware people like you and I years ago listening to this. What did Margaret and Brendan mean by self-awareness? So, help define self-awareness for our crew out there.
Yeah. So, and I actually generally use the word self-understanding, which to me, right, and everybody has their own definition. So I'm really glad that you asked about that. That self-awareness to me oftentimes means I understand the emotion I'm having in the moment. And whereas self-understanding for me includes your backstory. So I have these 6 questions that I honed them on myself, and then over the years of teaching and things, and they're really aimed at helping us understand ourselves. Where do our reactions come from? Where do some of these beliefs or biases or whatever come from? So the first question is around, who and whose thinking have shaped you, and of course, it's going to be early experiences. In fact, those are very, very key. Parents, siblings, early teachers, grandparents. College dorm mate, or, these kinds of things. But it's people that helped you, and it can be people that hurt you, because they all shape our experience. And it's also ideas that come from books or movies or conversations, right? So this is a big question. In fact, I tell people, listen, you're not done with this. The first 5 times you look at it, my own answer to that question is 6 pages of single space type, right? And I still go back and edit and add to it. So that's one question. But the one thing I want to say too is that, many people have dealt with some difficult stuff in their life.
Sure.
So they oftentimes don't want to go back and look at that. And so I oftentimes use this quote by C.S. Lewis, the British author, which I just find so helpful here. He says, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. And I think, that's what this is all about, right? You and I both had these reviews that said something's broken, but
Yeah.
you're not done yet. So the first one is around who and whose thinking have shaped you. The second one is about events and situations. And to me, this includes lucky accidents and unlucky accidents. The unlucky one is the car accident or the time you got sick and missed the interview, or right, lots of those things. But lucky accidents, and the one I hear a lot, is when somebody says, I really didn't want to go to that party that night, but my friend made me go, and that's where I met my spouse. Right? So that's a super common one. But it could be other things, the time you stopped by somebody's office and they told you something that changed your life. So you're right, lots of these situations and events. The third one is around how you define success in your personal life and your professional life. These are your definitions, not your parents, not society's, not anyone else's, but you. The fourth one is around values. What are your core values, and how do they play out? Or the sub question there is, are you living your values or someone else's? And these are hard questions, actually. People oftentimes don't know what their core values are. And so I have 2 quick ways in. One is, if we looked at your calendar, what would we infer about your values? Because what you value crowds out everything else. And the second is to think about what makes you mad. What makes you really mad when you see it or hear it or witness it, whatever it is? Because very oftentimes what's making you mad is a value of yours has been stepped on. So that's why you're angry. So that's the fourth. The fifth is around self-awareness. This is about, how aware are you of your emotions when you're having them and the impact that your behaviors have on others. And a quick way into that is to ask yourself, who knows you're angry first, you or the person you're with? If it's you, good for you. That means you're pretty self-aware. If it's them, maybe some work. And then the last one is about what type of feedback you've received over your life, and that is in your personal and professional life, because we oftentimes think we are so different at home and at work, and yet very oftentimes the feedback we get is very similar.
Yeah.
That you're a good listener or not a good listener, or you're on your phone too much, or whatever it is. So those things together kind of start to form, who are you?
Yeah, so I like those. I just jotted them down. Who, events, success, values, emotions and impact, and feedback. I like that. I like how you phrase that, like, when you're mad, who knows first, you or somebody else? Because I can tell you, 27, the back of the room knew. You could feel it.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I've come out of meetings and I'd say to somebody, oh, that was horrible. They're like, I had no idea. I go, you weren't supposed to have any idea. But that took, I don't know, 25 years of maturing and growing and developing to get there. I wish I could have done it sooner. Let me ask you one little test. A lot of times when I feel like something's not going well or something isn't right or just whatever, sometimes I ask myself, what's the other person's intent? Did they mean to do it, or did it just happen? Because I got kids. Somebody gets left out of a party. They aren't invited. I don't get invited to a meeting, and your reaction is, oh, they didn't want me there. And then I go, wait, did they not want me there, or was it just like unintentional? They didn't put me on the email, or some didn't get invited, and I've found that's helped me emotionally a lot, because so many times I go, I don't think this was a planned conspiracy against me. It was just they invited 15 people and I got left off. And
Yes, I think that's true. And I'll go even one step further than that, is that, sometimes people have very good intentions, but their behaviors don't match those intentions.
sure.
So, right, they did not intend to hurt your feelings or whatever it is. But the other is if they did, then that says more about them than it says about you.
Oh,
Right. And
absolutely.
yeah.
Because trust me, there are times I do answer, oh no, they know what they were doing.
Yes.
But then at least you know how to handle that.
Yeah, and I think it says more about them that they
Yep.
would, try to cause harm or be indifferent to somebody suffering. So yeah, I think you can't control what other people do. You can only manage your own reaction, which is oftentimes hard.
So let's get on the ground floor. So I was going to talk about self-awareness, but I'm going to use self-understanding. I like that. So if there's a listener out there that's leading day to day and they ask you, what can I do tomorrow, to this week, next week? What can I do between now and the end of the year to kind of hone in on more of my self-understanding? And how can I show up as a better self-understander or better, more self-aware right away, starting tomorrow? What could they do?
I'd say start wherever you are, right? Start wherever you are. That there's a process to this, as you know. It doesn't happen overnight. The epiphany might hit you in the head, right? And that feels like it happens overnight. Although, as we know, it took years and years and years to get there. But really, it's starting. It's starting where you are, and realizing that if you have any type of feedback, if you're nerdy like me, I actually have old performance reviews. I know that's weird. But to go back and look at those, what are the patterns here? What do you see? If you do a 360 or some sort of multi-rater type of assessment, these can be very helpful to understand how people are viewing you, and how your own sense of self may be different, how you come across than other people would say. So I think the first part is really digging into that self-understanding. And you know what? Sometimes as we do that, it takes a lot of courage to do that, to shine a light inside when, sometimes you don't like what you see, or you remember embarrassing situations or, cringeworthy behavior or these kinds of things. And you know what? But thing is, they may be there in your past, but it's good to kind of become aware of those. So it's starting with that. And then, I oftentimes use these 3 questions, which I say, what kind of leader are you now? And that is, what words and phrases would you use, or do other people use, etc. The second question is, what type of leader would you like to become? What words or phrases would you like to be used about you? And then, of course, what's the delta? What's the difference between, question 1 and question 2? And those very oftentimes deal with behaviors. I need to listen more. I need to delegate better, right? Whatever it is. And that's if you think that self-understanding, it takes some courage. Boy, self-management is hard. And the reason for that is because when you're trying a new behavior, you're just not going to be very good at it in the very beginning. You're going to mess up left, right, and center. And that can be embarrassing when you do that. You're just not good at it yet. So, and I say you're not good at it yet, right? You have to keep at it. You get better slowly and then quickly.
All right, Margaret. So I'm going to turn the next minute or two into maybe executive coaching of me, if you don't mind. So
Sure.
you talked about performance reviews and looking back, and it's interesting. That's something I've done. And I did throughout my career because I kind of have a natural inclination, like, hey, I'd like to be better. And, how have I done? And there's certain things that show up in performance review after performance review that I kind of say, I'm okay with that. That's who I am. Like, I'll give you, for instance, I don't think I've ever had a performance review where I haven't been called out for being not the most patient person. Brendan, you're not the most patient. And I've kind of, in my career, said, I'm okay with that, just based on the roles that I've had. I've taken roles where I'm responsible for high growth of an organization. I'm CEO of a high growth company that's private equity. And I'm like, I'm okay with being impatient if it doesn't have a negative impact. And I could name others. I'm not going to pull out all my performance reviews for you, but maybe just one. So is it okay to be okay with some flaws as long as we're self-aware about some of those flaws?
It depends, right? Of course, the great answer you were not hoping for. But it does depend, because the thing is that you can, whatever it is, whether it's being impatient or any other thing that any of us have, that there may be times when that gets in our way, right?
Sure.
That we make somebody really angry or upset them, or, whatever it is. So the thing is that what got us here won't necessarily get us there. So a lot of times, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, a lot of times it's our intelligence, our drive, our being good at our technical or functional skills to get us to this certain level. But from then on, it becomes, as we rise in our career, it becomes more and more about the relationship skills, the interpersonal skills. And so the thing is that, what got you here won't necessarily get you there, which is, an old quote by Marshall Goldsmith. But the other is that it may be fine, but it will only be fine in certain situations. So if we, I oftentimes think of each level of us requires or each level of our career requires a different level of us. And sometimes it's learning a new behavior or skill, and sometimes it's unlearning that, right? So for example, being impatient absolutely can help in a lot of circumstances. It can probably also hurt in another one of those. So, it depends on where it's happening and how it's happening. The one I oftentimes think of is that, early in our career, oftentimes we're told, we have to speak up more, right? We have to speak up more in meetings. But then as you go on in your career, you have to learn to speak up less and to get other people to speak up, right? So you feel like, well, wait a minute, I was just learned this new thing and now I have to unlearn it. It's like, well, yes, strategically you have to unlearn it. It doesn't mean that you don't participate. It just means that you set conditions that other people will. So it's a long way of saying that it depends, right? You could be in a position where that still is more helpful than hurtful. But you could be in positions where it becomes more of a liability, and you just have to monitor that and see which is which.
All right. Well, I took some notes on that one. So, you talked about, the younger people speaking up more. And then as you are more seasoned and more mature, and as you rise through an organization, being careful that you speak less. And that kind of takes me to think about like the millennial generation, and that a lot of people still see the millennial generation as a young generation, but it's the biggest generation in our workforce now. Like by far, it's the most in our workforce. And how do you see like the millennial generations, like what are some of their leadership styles and uniquenesses? I think every generation, not to generalize, but I think each generation has certain traits, just based on what you talked about earlier, the environment they grew up in, the times they grew up in. So any thoughts on the millennial generation, which is the largest group in the workforce today?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think of the different age cohorts in the workforce just like any other type of diversity,
Yeah.
right? We have people from the West Coast and East Coast and the South and the North kind of thing in the workforce. And so I oftentimes think, well, people from the South might have been raised differently than I was raised when I was in California, et cetera. But there's also a lot of similarities. So yeah, I think that, access and ease with technology is one thing that keeps coming up with different cohorts. On the other hand, we all go through very similar milestones at the same time, So, and in fact, I think I remember reading, this was many, many years ago, where they said, "Oh yeah, was it the millennials? I think they were talking about. They're just like the boomers, but they have a plan." And I thought, oh, I think we do go through different stages of our life, and so people in their 20s are probably more similar than in that age cohort than they are in the generational cohort. So I think it's important to realize that they're younger than us, or me anyway, but that doesn't mean that they are, the millennials are monolithic, that they are all the same kind of thing, just as people from the West Coast aren't all the same, or people from all accountants or whatever. So they have some similarities, but they're all unique. And I have to tell you, I learned this in a way I would never have thought, and that was having kids. So I have 3 kids, and before having children, I had spent very little time around kids. I had never changed a diaper.
Yep.
And so when I had kids, my first one, I remember when I was leaving the hospital thinking that if they knew how little I know about what I'm about to do, there was no way they would let me leave with him, because that would be child endangerment.
Absolutely.
But they didn't know, and they let me leave with him, and I had to learn everything, not only how to feed him and clothe him and stuff like that, but just how to relate to him as an individual. And then, I thought when my second son came along, I'm like, oh, cool, I know this now. And I was totally wrong, because my second son was completely different from my first son. Different moods, different ways of doing things, different sense of humor, etc. And so then when my daughter came along, I'm like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. And again, I was wrong. And I think that was the biggest epiphany for me, was that, if my own kids who were raised in the same household, same parents, everything, if my own genetic material isn't similar in the way they behave and think, why would I ever expect this random collection of strangers at work to be remotely similar? And that's when it really did hit me that, oh, right, we're all individual.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I got asked a question recently at a keynote. One of the questions was, Brendan, when do you think your leadership really started to accelerate and you started to figure it out? And I said about 5 years after my first kid. Just because like you remember I talked about one of my challenges of patience. Kids teach your patience. Like,
Yes,
you can't be impatient with a 1-year-old. Like, you can't.
that's right.
You're gonna say, okay, you didn't finish eating. I'm gonna leave you. No, you have to keep doing whatever. But I really meant that answer. It was an authentic answer. Having kids, I truly believe makes you a better parent. It definitely makes you a better listener. And the next question I had for you really revolved around, I could actually say parenting is, how do you balance when you talk about self-understanding and self-awareness, empathy and accountability?
Mm-hmm.
Because like
Yes.
you want to have the accountability, but you also want to be understanding to, what someone's going through.
Yes, yes. I think that is a great example of a paradox, right?
Yeah.
Where you don't, I think of it like a barbell, right? With it, empathy and accountability on different sides. And we tend to want to go to one side or the other, when in truth, what we want to do is be able to figure out how to do both. So that you can have empathy and hold people accountable. That when somebody is going through something, yeah, you might expect there would be a little bit of a slip, but you do have to talk to them and figure out how can we make this work. And you can also say no to people with a great deal of empathy. I used to work with this woman who had a job. I don't know why. I could never have done her job, but her job oftentimes was telling people no. And she was so good at it that you would walk out of her office agreeing with her, right? And it wasn't that she gave you a better argument. It was that she heard you.
Yeah.
She listened. And I'll never forget that, and she was telling you no. So I thought, yeah, okay, you can do both. You can do both.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So, we've talked a lot about as a leader, how you grow, and as a leader, how you mature and how you become more self-aware and self-understanding. What happens when a leader thinks they've got it figured out and they don't evolve?
Oh my gosh. So the minute you think you figured it out, by definition you don't, right? It's just like in every movie, right? When somebody says, well, there was our obstacle and there's the big looming one right in front of them. So I think as a leader and truly as a person, as an individual, we're always evolving. And if we're not evolving, we're kind of backsliding. Because if you think about it, especially in the professional world, if we're not growing, we're not just standing still, we're being passed because other people are growing. So in a way, by not continuing to learn and to grow, we're, we're getting worse. Let's say that. So I think what often happens is that people get to the stage where they become comfortable, maybe overly complacent. I'm really good. I'm going to rest on my laurels, kind of thing, and that hurts us. There's a saying, I don't know who said it, but they said the best leaders are the best learners, and I think that is so true. That if you think about people that rise to very high levels, at least the ones that we know of, right? Not every CEO has been written about or talked about with this, is that they continue to evolve, they continue to learn, and if we don't, we're in danger of derailing our career. And a lot of times, I always think of somebody asked, it was in one of the Hemingway books, I can't remember which one it was. He said, how does somebody go bankrupt? And the answer was slowly, then all at once. And I think that's the way careers derail, that very oftentimes, these issues were with you all along, but your good points outweighed some of the downside. But as we rise in an organization, some of those downsides become more important and can actually derail our career.
And that kind of leads to, one of the later topics I wanted to talk about, is, let's just say AI, just using that as a generic term, and the impact that's having on the workforce, the way that impact that's having on leadership and productivity and business. And, that's on the heels of if a leader's not like learning, they're not improving, they're not evolving. And now you got AI, which says evolve faster. Any thoughts you would share with our audience on the impact of AI on leadership and self-awareness and self-understanding?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the second I utter anything, it will be out of date because the evolution of this thing is amazingly fast. I think in truth that there's a lot of hype on both sides. It's going to kill us all. No, it's going to be the best thing since sliced bread, kind of thing. And I think the answer is somewhere in between. I think it is going to help with lots of things. I was talking with one of my kids the other day and saying, well, what would be the best use of AI? And we said, oh, wouldn't it be great if you could get rid of those stupid phone trees that we have, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. And just, you could talk, you could say what it is and the AI would know where to route your call, right? Or something like that. And we thought, yeah, because it could also infer from your tone of voice how mad you were, right? So, I mean, there's things like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? But I also think, there is a danger that we're going to outsource some of our thinking to it. There is some evidence that can happen too. So before I say what, or I would say, I just think we don't know yet. We're still in the very early stages of this. But the other thing is that AI is like any other technology. By itself, it's not good or bad. It's what we do with it. And as we know, most technologies, we can do some awesome things with it, and we can also do some really bad things with it too. So, I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, I was originally comparing it to when we moved all our data to the web. And I said, when we moved it all to the cloud, it was more efficient. We also made, hackers, a worldwide business, and that
Yes,
they
yes.
had quote unquote easier access, although security can take that away. So, whenever there's a big leap forward, from the desktop to a laptop, from a laptop basically to a phone, which is what a computer had for computing power 5 years ago, there's always great things you can do with it. But then if you want to do bad things with it, you've just enabled bad people to do bad things faster. Uh,
Yes, yes.
so,
And on a
um,
bigger scale.
not a bit,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so my last question, I want to talk about your book. So, Manage Yourself to Lead Others. I think it's right over your left shoulder there. That red book, I recognize the cover. What's if you could just take one piece of advice and in conclusion, kind of share it with our audience? What would be the one piece of advice you'd extract from the book and leave our crew with?
I would say it's probably not a piece of advice, it's more of a statement, and that is that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but other people judge us by our behaviors. So I may intend to be a great teammate or a great boss, but if my behaviors don't match that, then people will not judge me to be a great boss or teammate. Very oftentimes this shows up and people feel very misunderstood. I don't know why my team doesn't love me. I'm, doing everything I can. And very oftentimes it's because they can't see that because your behaviors are getting in the way. So if you feel misunderstood, take a step back and have a look at that.
Awesome, awesome advice. Well, just I guess one sidebar question: if our audience wants to uh, follow up and learn more about you, you've got your book, "Managing Yourself to Lead Others," that came out in September. Where can they get that? Do you have a website? What's your course at Harvard? If they want to get in contact with you, learn more from you, how can the audience do that?
Great. Thanks for that question. So the best way for me is always LinkedIn. That's really one of the very few social medias that I use. I am Margaret C. Andrews there. Also my website, you can find me there as Margaret Andrews, no C, margaretandrews.com. The book is available pretty much wherever books are sold, pretty much all online retailers, lots of different, bookstores, the Harvard Coop, the MIT Coop, etc. You asked me one other question, and I'm blanking on what the answer was.
If somebody want to take a course that you
Oh,
teach,
yeah. Great, thank you. So there is a 15-week course if you like doing lots of readings and papers and, discussions and things like that. I have a 15-week course at Harvard called Managing Yourself and Leading Others. There's also a professional development program at Harvard called Managing Yourself and Leading Others. So if you type into a search engine, in quotes, Managing Yourself and Leading Others, it will come up. It'll be in the first 2 or 3 of the search findings.
all right. Well, thank you for being our fearless leader this month. From UC Berkeley to Deloitte to MIT to Harvard to speaking to writing to doing podcasts. Thanks for putting yourself out there. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. And thanks for making an impact on the world and making it a better place by making all of us understand ourselves a little bit better. So thank you for joining the Fearless Experience.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
This has been the Fearless Experience with Brendan P. Keegan. If you want to learn to live and lead fearlessly, go to brendanpkeegan.com.